Hello, I'm Dr. Lauren Wills, and I'm an assistant professor of biology here at CSU. I teach foundations of biology, environmental toxicology, and environmental law and policy. And for professors here at CSU, one of the things that's very important to us is faith integration, which means that we integrate our faith into our areas of study. We integrate our faith into how we think about our subject matter, and we think about our faith in how we teach our subject matter. So for me, as an environmental toxicologist, what this looks like is really wrestling and considering the responsibility of Christians in protecting the earth. So what is the responsibility for me as a Christian in environmental stewardship, in creation care, in good dominion of the earth? And I've been really wrestling with this topic and researching it, and that has really led to some wonderful conversations and collaborations with Ryan.
So I'm Dr. Ryan Gimple. I teach in the Christian Studies department here at the Charleston Southern. And I'm focused on mission. My degree's in applied theology. And so that means, I teach the classes on mission and thinking about what is our role, what is God's purpose, how are we joining God in his mission in the world. And so think about what is our role then in caring for God's creation. That is an aspect of understanding our mission in the world. So I hadn't really thought about this too much until I went with Lauren to a research conference last year and with several of the other science faculty in how to research health and well-being and religion and the intersection of that. And it was a wonderful experience, and it started this conversation. I guess the place to start a conversation about the care of creation is with Scripture and with from the book of Genesis with the story of creation. And what I see emphasized in Genesis 1 is that God says over and over as he's creating the environment and the diversity within it, he says multiple times that, and God saw that it was good. That phrase is repeated. And so the creation, God sees the creation as good. So we can't look at the created world and think, okay, well, so things with like the study of science in the physical world, that is something less than or lower than the or is not important, but what we really need to focus on is the spiritual things. The Bible doesn't give. The Bible shows us that God values His creation, so we need to value it also. But also, then we're part of the creation. That God has created us on the sixth day, together with the animals, but with a special role, a responsibility. So Genesis 1:26 says, so then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth. And so God values even the creatures that crawl on the earth, but He's made us in His image and with a special a mandate that we are to rule. We're to have dominion over creation. And as Lauren and I have talked, that this word dominion has come up pretty often. So what do you think about this, Lauren, when you think about that we are to have dominion over creation? What is that issues that bring up for you?
When I think about the word dominion, I think about the ways that we have fallen short. So for members of marginalized people groups, right, the word dominion often brings up history of the way that humans have failed in dominion, right? The way that they have used dominion, people have used dominion to oppress others, to abuse others. And in terms of environmental science and environmental protection, we think about the ways that people have used the arguments of dominion in order to abuse or exploit the environment. And really, for me, what that has really boiled down to is bad dominion, right? That we have failed in many ways to exercise our God-given dominion over the earth. And so, right, that ultimately comes down to the original sin, right, the fall of man. And so if we go back to Genesis, in Genesis chapter 3, where we can see the consequences of Adam and Eve's disobedience and how that changed their relationship with God. But in Genesis chapter 3, it also talks about how their disobedience changed their relationship with the earth. So prior to the fall, right, it was very easy for Adam to grow food, and his relationship with the animals and the plants was very harmonious. And after the fall, in Genesis chapter 3, it said that Adam was going to have to toil to bring forth things from the earth, and that he was going to have to fight thorn and thistle to be able to gain resources from the earth. And we see that, right? We see that now in the fact that we have to grow food, we have to deal with pests and weeds and drought and flood and all of these difficulties in terms of pulling things out of the earth. But, right, because God is so loving and generous, he's given us amazing gifts of wisdom and tenacity and curiosity and all of these amazing gifts and innovation, right, that has enabled us to find ways to pull resources from the earth and more efficiently than we ever have before, right? So every year we get better at doing it, which has improved lifestyles around the globe and has improved quality of life and all those things. But the flip side of that, right, in terms of dominion and poor dominion, is that it's also been polluted by our sin, right? Our sins of selfishness and greed and ignorance. And those things have led to a host of environmental tragedies that have occurred throughout human history. And as a toxicologist, one of the most recent in my mind is the crisis in Flint, Michigan, where the residents of Flint were having to deal with high levels of lead in their water from 2014 till the end of 2018. And that was due to poor dominion, right? They hadn't taken care of the Flint River for decades. And so when the water system was switched to the Flint River, that water was polluted already. But then on top of that, the politicians didn't deal with the infrastructure of the pipes properly. And so lead was leaching out from the pipes into the water. And as a result, the people of Flint have very high levels of lead in their systems. And for a toxicologist, we study the fact that lead is a developmental toxin, which means that the children of Flint, Michigan will have developmental delays that will last them their entire lives. And as a Christian, that saddens me because that's not loving our neighbors well. That's not caring for the least of these. That's not caring for the children, right? In a way that I believe Christ would want us to. Another area that we can't ignore is that this summer, right, the whole country watched in horror as the West Coast was basically on fire. And even now, today, Colorado is dealing with large fires and the need to evacuate. And those fires have been attributed to poor forest management, which is, right, showing our ignorance in the managing of the forests and the woods around our homes. But in addition to that, in Colorado, right, changing climate has resulted in a larger than normal beetle population, which has killed the trees more than normal. And those dead trees then are basically kindling for the fires. And so this just kind of all made the problem worse. And it's this snowball effect. And I think often when we consider environmental protection, it seems like it's a trade-off between protecting the environment and protecting the economy. But when we look at these fires, right, we have to face the fact that poor management of the environment is, yes, it's bad for the environment itself. It's bad for the trees and the animals, right? But it's also bad for human health. People lost their lives. And it's also bad for human livelihood, right? People lost their homes and their businesses. And so we're all connected, right? We are a part of creation, and therefore mismanagement of the environment will affect both human lives and livelihoods.
And when like hearing those stories and thinking, or these problems seem so huge, how can they be avoided? And I think of Paul's words in Romans that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. I think we are falling short of his glory in the way we're exercising dominion, whether we're abdicating it or whether we're greedily lording it over others for ourselves. And so what's the hope? And this is where the gospel can shine out in this conversation, because Jesus Christ is the way and the truth and the life, and he's our hope for this also. The Bible shows us that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are portraying Jesus as the Messiah King, that they portray him as the anointed one, the chosen one of God, but also as the King who's ruling. And I think so what is good dominion? We can see what is bad dominion, how we failed in these various ways. But when we think what is right dominion, the person to look to is Jesus. And in the Gospels show us that Jesus ruled the kingdom different than how we think of ruling. There's no sign in Jesus of oppressing others or of greedily taking advantage of others for the building up of himself. That his rule looked completely different. He cared for the he healed the lepers and reached out to the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the people that were on the edges, the marginalized people. He showed his authority, though. He showed authority over evil spirits, over where he calms the storm, over all of nature. So Jesus has a kingly authority, but it's not one that is self-serving. He shows a self-giving throughout his ministry. The disciples didn't understand that they had a different view. In fact, they thought as Jesus is going to Jerusalem and they're excited, oh, you're coming into your kingdom. So Lord, when you go into your kingdom, we want to be on your right and left, and we give us these special positions. And Jesus brings the disciples together and says, no, you can't. The Gentiles lord it over others, not so with you. And Jesus teaching us what's right dominion, that he sets the example saying we're not to do it the way the rest of the world does. And in Jesus's last moments before his death, we see the clearest picture of him being portrayed as the king. Is when he's being beaten and spit on and persecuted by the Roman soldiers. They drape a scarlet robe over him and put a crown of thorns on his head. And they put a sign on the cross that's declaring that Jesus is the king of the Jews, and is put in multiple languages, declaring him the king. So what the right dominion, I think, how do we follow Jesus in dominion? What is ruling rightly over creation look like? Well, it looks like Jesus going to the cross, humbling ourselves in service and putting others first, loving our enemies, and that should affect how we live in relationship with other humans, but also it's dominion over the environment, that there isn't enough he's showing us a new way of ruling and transforming that. So the hope is not in ourselves and our own efforts. That it's by grace that we're saved through faith, and we're putting our hope in King Jesus. And as he's raised from the dead, that leads us to that we are transformed when we put our faith in him, and that leads to new relationships with other people, with God, with other people, and with all of creation. And so I think the gospel, it shouldn't be sidelined or set aside in this conversation, but that we can be proclaiming the gospel as we're having these discussions.
Absolutely. And that leads us right to then what does restoration look like, right? And so what does it look like for us as humans and, as followers of Christ to exercise good dominion? One of the things that, that we've wrestled with, right, is this idea that perfect restoration will not happen until Jesus returns. So perfect restoration is not possible. And Jesus, in this kind of fallen world. And Jesus even told, right, his followers that the poor will always be with us until he comes again. And so there's always going to be sin, and there's always going to be selfishness and greed, and therefore there's always going to be failures of humanity. But that doesn't mean that we don't do anything, right? That doesn't mean for us as Christians that we just kind of throw our hands up in the air and give up, right? We demonstrate Christ's love to the rest of the world in the way that we care for each other, in the way that we love our neighbors, right? And in the way that we try to exercise servant leadership, right? That we show that good dominion. And so, right, practical ways, there's so many ideas, and the problems can seem so big, and therefore the solutions need to be so big, and it can be very disheartening. But I do believe that the first steps, right, are to have these conversations, right, to have this interdisciplinary collaboration where we all have a seat at the table and we discuss these problems and come up with solutions together. And that we try in our everyday lives to demonstrate that servant leadership, and that we demand that, from those of us with authority, that they also demonstrate that servant leadership.
Yeah, Christians shouldn't run away from science or think that actually we need to be putting efforts into the understanding that Christians need to have a place at the table and be applying theology to the discipline of biology and ecology and these questions. And the main reason for it, so Colossians 1 presents Jesus as that all things hold together in him, in Jesus, that he might have first place in everything, that God was pleased to have all of his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile everything to himself, things on earth, things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. And so in Jesus, I think that science and the Christian studies are reconciled through Jesus. But we're also then, as big as the problems look like, we can have hope and know death has been defeated. Jesus is Lord. His kingdom is come. And one day he's going to return and restore all things to be new. That doesn't mean we don't work towards, it means just the opposite. We work towards living out this reality now, that we pray that his kingdom would come and will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that's going to lead us to interact with our environment in different ways and have these kind of conversations.
Yes.
So I want to invite any of you who, the CSU alum and students and anyone in the community that is interested in having these conversations with us. You're welcome to our campus. Would love to meet you and include you in these conversations. Buccaneers should have a voice, and we should be researching this. So,
absolutely. Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!